Hey, hi, hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my February 2022 reading wrap up. The month of February went slightly better than the month of January, but honestly, not by much. So I am currently leaving the month in the middle of two books. The first one is Dark Rise. I will not be counting any of the statistics from this book towards February. The other book is The Great Hunt. I am fully planning on finishing this up before February actually finishes. So I have taken what I would have read for the rest of this and put it into my February statistics as if I had already finished the book. I did have to make an estimation as to my rating. I read 1,990 pages, which approximately evens out to 71 pages a day. That's really good. I'm trying to read at least 60 pages a day physically, so I am still on track to do that. I also listened to approximately 58 hours of audiobooks throughout the month, which is a lot more, I feel like, than last month, which averages me out at approximately 2 hours of audiobook listening a day. What I rated my books looks so much different from last month though. I have 2 1-star books, 2 2-star books, 1 3-star book, 5 4 or 4.5 star books, and 2 5-star books. My absolute favorite book this month and my honorary mention are actually the 2 5-star books, and I was having a hard time putting which one would be my favorite and which one would be the honorary mention, and so eventually I just kind of threw them here, but it is kind of a little bit more arbitrary than normal. My average rating for the month was a 3.4, which means we have gone up a 0.1 since last month, but it is still lower than my yearly average and my lifetime average. I read 12 books, one of which was previously on my pause shelf, and I took it off and finished it, so I'm really happy about that. And then I DNF'd 2 books, but I am not sure that they are forever DNFs. I'm not comfortable calling them pauses, but I'm not quite comfortable saying that they will be DNFs for the rest of their lives either. The genres that I read this month were 5 fantasy books, 1 horror, 1 magical realism, 2 sci-fi, 2 fantasy romances, and 1 thriller. I used to categorize romance as its own category, but I realized that I never read anything that is just romance, and when I was trying to categorize these books, I was having a hard time deciding whether or not they should go into fantasy or romance. So I am now changing my romance genre tracker into a fantasy romance tracker, which means that last month technically I did read 1 less fantasy than I said and 1 more fantasy romance. So the 2 books that I DNF'd, the first one is Age of Ash by Daniel Abrams. The reason why I DNF'd this one is because I was just not feeling it at the time, and I am wondering if I will pick it up in the future when I'm feeling it more so. The second book that I DNF'd is The Unspoken Name, and once again it goes into that same category, but I can say that this one I am more hesitant to pick back up than Age of Ash. So let's start at the top of the month like I always do with The Woods Are Always Watching. It is a YA horror written by the same author who I got it wrong in the reading vlog, but it is the author who wrote Anna and the French Kiss. I got it wrong in that reading vlog and I kept saying that it was by the author who wrote P.S. I Love You. And I will say I was pleasantly surprised by this book, but I will also say I don't think I would really recommend this to anyone out there because it is such a very niche audience, and it is very, very specific to horror that I personally like to consume. This book is about 2 high school girls. They are best friends. They have been best friends for about 4 years now, and they realize that with college approaching, they are about to leave each other forever, and so they are going to have one last hurrah and go off hiking in the woods for 3 days together. The problem is these girls have never been hiking before and don't really know how to do anything woodsy, and once they get out there, they start to bicker and fight and realize realize that maybe going apart and separating and going off to college is actually for the best. While they're out there, an accident does happen, leaving one of them injured, and the other girl has to run off to try and get help. And once they are separated, two men start hunting both of them. There is a little bit more going on after that, and there are lots of really, really dark elements that happen to these two girls, but the horror element really doesn't take place until about 50-60% through the book, and that's why I think I would be really hesitant to recommend it to anyone. It was such a slow burn horror that you have to be invested in this story of these two girls and kind of their normal high school experience for a large chunk of the book before you're going to get anything kind of dark. I really, really enjoyed that though, and I enjoyed getting to know the girls a lot better, and I don't think the book would have hit as excellently as it did for me if it hadn't had that slow burnness to it, and if I hadn't gotten to really get into these girls' lives and know how they think and know why they're thinking in certain ways that they are. I definitely would say that this was an older YA horror. There were lots of dark elements, as I said, and they were so dark to the point that I was kind of shocked that this book could still be called a YA. There is, of course, reference to rape in the story and murder, but there's also torture and abuse, and on page, I don't even want to say it to be honest, but I'm trying to give you guys trigger warnings. It's just so gross. Anyways, there is a person who touches themselves in front of a small child. The horror element was so shocking and so unexpected that it really was what brought me into the story and what really made me love it. But I will say that I wasn't a huge fan of the ending of the book because I felt like it just kind of came out of nowhere. I know it didn't. I know that there had been hints for it, but I wanted to see these two girls overcome the struggle and not necessarily be saved from the struggle. So I ended up rating this book a 3.5. I think I would read it again, and I think I would check out other horror by this author in the future. Up next, I have Whisper of Shadow and Flames, which was the book I had previously put on pause and then finished off this month, and I didn't really like it. So it is the sequel to Shadow of Stone and Blood. I always get that title wrong. Song of Blood and Stone, and I really loved the first book. I rated it at 5 out of 5 stars, and then book 2, I rated it 2 out of 5 stars. It wasn't for me. My biggest issue with this one and why I didn't like this one as much as book 1 is because it is a series of standalone books, and I did not like the characters in this one. I really liked the characters in book 1, and I have slowly learned to realize about myself that if I don't like the characters, there's pretty much no way in hell that I'm going to like the book. I did look into book 3, and book 3 has some of the characters from this one and some new characters, so I don't think I'm going to continue on with book 3 because I absolutely could not stand these characters. In this story, we are following 3 main protagonists. There is like a 4th POV, but she is so small to the story that it's not even really worth mentioning. So we have these 2 people on the opposite sides of a war. We have this man named Darvin, who is like this powerful leader in the rebel faction, and then we have this woman who is the daughter of the Lord King, and she is basically a slave to blood magic, so she has to do whatever is told to her, and she is told to go off and find this shadow fox and kill him, and she ends up teaming up with Darvin. He doesn't know what her goals are. She is trying to just infiltrate the rebel faction, and she doesn't know that Darvin is the Shadow Fox. And of course, eventually she realizes, and it is a battle of she has to kill him, but she has fallen in love with him. We are also following a character named Zelly, and she is the topmost servant to this woman in this powerful, I think it's like a governor's mansion, and she has to try to protect her owner, who is about to go off on this dangerous philosopher's journey. She's trying to hide the fact from her father, who is the governor, that she's about to like run off and do this thing, and Zelly is in love with her, I can't think of what the word is, but the woman who she serves fiance. So I felt like our main 2 protagonists, Kiara and Darvin, had major insta love, and that is something that I really can't get on board with. I couldn't figure out why these 2 characters were falling in love with each other, and I didn't see any reason for them to be so attached to each other. And I understand that Kiara didn't want to be an assassin and didn't want to go off and be killing people, but I didn't get why this one was so much like, oh, I'm gonna fall in love with this man. I also felt like the plot was very predictable and way too easy. The whole entire Kiara overcoming the blood magic on her happens like way too early on in the story, and then the rest of the book is kind of them happy together, but like not. It's just like was way too convenient, and I wasn't a fan. The love story I did enjoy, and I don't even think you can really call it a love story, is between Zelly and her owner's fiance. It ends absolutely in the worst way possible, but it was so much more interesting to me because we didn't have this insta love. There was actually reasons behind why people were feeling the ways that they were feeling, and there were some twists and turns that I didn't see coming, unlike the rest of the story where I found it very, very predictable. So on my whack caw pile rating, this one did come out at a 2.3. Up next, I read Where the Drowned Girls Go by Seanan McGuire, which is the newest book in the Wayward Children series, which is a whole series about children who grew up in our world and found doors to go to their perfect places. And then some of the books are about children in those worlds, and some of the books are about children who have been returned to our world and have been sent to this school to try and deal with the fact that they are no longer allowed to be in the perfect place for them. This book was about Cora, who also showed up in the book Beneath the Sugar Sky, and she is trying to deal with being at this school, and it isn't adjusting for her super well, and she feels like she can hear the gods from her original world still calling out to her. So she hears about this other school, which is all about forgetting your past door instead of dealing with the trauma of this world, and so she transfers from this loving and welcoming and forgiving environment into this place where it is all about forgetting and regimens and just moving on from who you used to be. Cora is a great character, and I really love following her, and I really liked seeing some of the other characters from previous books show up in this one. Specifically, we saw Reagan from Across the Green Grass Fields, and she took a much larger role in this book than I thought she was going to. I also really liked seeing the different responses to children going through doorways, and we've seen that a lot through the whole entire series as different parents or guardians or leader figures have come forward and said that, oh, I also went through a door when I was younger. But it was really interesting to see how these characters dealt with it. I really enjoyed this one, guys. I really did. I think this might be my second or third favorite in the series. I'm leaning towards third, to be honest. I was really excited to see Reagan. I think her book is actually my second favorite, and so having her once again with us was just so great and so heartwarming. Even though she's in like a horrible situation, it was so nice to like see someone that I've already gotten to know and I've already gotten to experience and I already love, because I have gotten to see Cora, and I do really enjoy Cora, and I think she is such a badass and such a strong character, but I personally like Reagan just like a little bit more, and I think that all comes from the fact that I was a horse girl as a child. The writing is absolutely amazing. Seanan McGuire has a fantastic way of putting words on the page, and the first 60% of the book is really more about lyricism than it is about a plot, and that was my favorite part of the story. In fact, in the last half of the book, when we are trying to get into a plot and we are starting to wrap things up, I was a little bit less interested in that, and I feel like it went a little bit too fast for my personal taste. These books are novellas, so they do go really fast as is, but I would have liked to have just like sat with the conclusion a little bit longer. I would have liked that rising action to just be a little bit slower. Overall, I really loved the book. The atmosphere is amazing. The characters are amazing. I really loved what Cora had to say about being fat and how it has affected her entire life and how it has brought her to where she is now. And I think that once again, Seanan McGuire has had a hit in this series, and I'm really excited to continue on and see where else she will be taking us in the future. I rated this one a 4.5. It is like waffling between a 4 and a 4.5. I'm considering moving it down to a 4, but I am still on the fence about it. Next, I read The Name of All Things, which is the sequel to Ruin of Kings, and my dude, before I even get to talking about what this book is about or what I rated it or any of my thoughts, this ending was one of my favorite endings that I have ever read. Ever. I feel like 80% of this book, I was feeling kind of like 4-star-ish with it, and then I got to the end and I was like, oh, so phenomenal. I loved it. And in Rune of Kings, we are following Kieran as he is realizing that he is the son of a wealthy family. He is realizing that he needs to fight them. There's a lot of stuff that is going on with his story. In book 2, we're picking up right where we left off in book 1, and Kieran is meeting up with a couple of people who want to task him to kill a dragon, and they are going back and telling their life story as to how they got here in the present day to try to explain why this dragon needs to die and why Kieran needs to be the person to kill the dragon. So the book is taking place in the same 3 years that book 1 took place in, but we are following completely different characters in a completely different setting of the world. I personally liked book 1 better. I think that I liked the characters and the setting way more so in book 1, but I didn't dislike book 2, and I feel like it kept me interested and it kept me going. The main reason why I obsess with this book right now is because of the last ending, which I can't even really tell you anything about, but I will say that one of the main characters, Relos Var, comes back and comes back strong. Overall, I really felt like I was kind of sad that we had grown a whole entire book 1 with these specific characters and then I didn't really get to see any of them in book 2, but I do know that in book 3 it's going to be a connection of the first 2 books, so it's going to help a lot that I'm going to have that, and it's going to draw me into the 2 stories that I have grown really attached to. I also really loved the narrator of this book. So each book is told in a letter from one person to another, and they somehow got the story of these people, and they are making footnotes and observations, and they are talking about what's going on in the main story. The narrator of this book is named Sinera, and she's so funny and so fantastic and so sassy, and it was just really great to have her bring me along in the story as it was going on. I ended up reading this book in Compile. It came out as a 4.5, but I decided that ending was so fantastic that I'm rounding it up and I'm putting it as a 5-star on Goodreads. Next we have The Last Argument of Kings, which is my favorite book that I read this month, and boy oh boy was it good! This is the 3rd and final book in the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. There are other books in this world, but they are not supposedly about the same characters, although I'm a little bit confused because there's definitely some questions left at the end of this that I hope we get resolved later. So far in these books, these are the first 3 that I have read by Joe Abercrombie, and I have rated all 3 of them 5 stars. I can say that I liked this book more than book 2, but not quite as much as book 1. In the first book, we are following a band of characters coming together as they are on the brink of war. They don't totally know that they're being drawn together by the magic in this world, and they are eventually going to go on this quest in book 2 to find this item that is going to help them end this war. Book 3 is picking up right after the problems that arose in book 2. The war is really picking up and is now a huge problem for everyone, and they are all just figuring out what the hell they are going to do with themselves. There's so much more to this series that I can't even really go into, but we're matching and that's fun. But the real thing that drew me into this series and made me fall absolutely in love with it is the characters. I love Logan. I really became attached to him by the end. I love Pharaoh. I love Giselle. I love Grokter. There's not a single character in these books that I dislike. There are characters I like less, West, but there are no characters that I hate. And I feel like by the end of the book, I was reeling. There are so many betrayals in this book. I was not ready for it. I was pretty sure that Joe Abercrombie was going to kill off characters in this one, and that I was going to be really upset and emotional at the ending. I forgot that death is not the worst thing that can happen to people, and that sometimes death is preferred to things that can happen to people. It's going to be one of my favorite conclusions to a series of all times, although nothing will ever beat the fate of the Tierling and how whack that ending was for me. Amazing. But I really enjoyed this, and I am excited to move on to Best Served Cold, which is the next book in this world, and it is the one that I have been waiting for. It is the one that I wanted to read, but I was told I really needed to read this series first, and I'm so glad I did because they were all fantastic and so good. Anyways, if you're a fan of grim dark fantasy series with a much more slower pacing but amazing characters and an amazing world, with just kind of like a touch of magic. The magic isn't a huge part of the stories, although it becomes more and more important. This is the series for you. Next up, I read the third book in the Zodiac Academy series, which is Zodiac Academy: The Reckoning. And this is a fantasy romance, smutty, new adult book series about these two girls who find out that they were changeling fae, and they are brought into the fae world to basically go to this like high school setting place to learn how to use their magic. And when they go there, they find out that they are actually the next in line for the throne, and that everyone else in line for the throne is dead. But everyone thought that they were dead too, so there were these heirs that were going to come up and take over the throne, and those heirs are these 4 boys at this school who are older and seem to be better with their magic than them, and these boys just bully the absolute crap out of these girls, hoping that they will not come and claim the throne that the boys want to now have. I've been enjoying this series, but it hasn't been like an amazing series so far. I rated book 1 and 2 a 2.5 because they're absolutely addicting. You don't want to put them down, but I felt like they were lacking in so many areas, and that the writing was there were lots of typos and errors and issues. But when I read book 3, it got worse. I didn't know it could get worse. I mean, I guess you can get worse than a 2.5. I didn't realize how many typos and errors you can make in a book. There were actual sections where they put the wrong name. They just typoed the wrong name. There were so many misspellings in this book. And then beyond that, I feel like the book was very repetitive, very formulaic, and there was just not enough that happened in the book for it to be as long as it was. I feel like the ending was really disappointing to me, and there was a lot more smut in this book than either of the first 2 books, but it was so mediocre that I just felt kind of disappointed that some of our characters we've been cheering for since the very beginning finally got together, and then it was like, meh. Also, there was a whole entire point plot about how the moon can make you horny, and I can't get over that. Some of the boys found out about like some of the things that the girls were doing, so the boys were like, oh, we're not going to trust the girls anymore, and blah, 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 blah. And then 2 chapters later, they'd be making out, and it didn't make sense. I still feel like there's not enough world building, and I don't have a good enough understanding of how the magic works, or how the school works, or how anything in this world works for me to just like accept it. Well, The Reckoning is a giant trial, and I felt like it was really just kind of boring, and I was skimming through most of it because it didn't even really matter. I ended up rating this book a 1.6. So on Goodreads, it rounds down to a 1. On a more pleasant note, next up, I read False Witness by Karen Slaughter. This is my 3rd Karen Slaughter, which is a standalone, and my 4th Karen Slaughter total. And guys, I loved it. I really, really enjoyed it. It was phenomenal. This is her newest book that she has written, and it reminded me of a love child between her 2 previous books that I had read, which is Pretty Girls and The Good Daughter. So in this book, we are following 2 sisters, one of which is a drug addict, and she is living on the streets, and she is just trying to forget her past, and the other one is a defense attorney, and she gets called in to defend this violent rapist to try to prove that he didn't do the crimes that he said he did. When she goes in to meet him, she realizes that he is a man from her past, and that he has information about her and her sister that they do not want leaked to the public. So he starts blackmailing the main defense attorney, saying, as long as you get me off on these rapes and don't get me sent to jail, I will make sure that this information I have will never see the light of day. Our main girl is kind of struggling because she realizes that if she lets him off, that he will go and continue to hurt more girls, but also she cannot have this information going out because her sister is already having a hard enough time dealing with their past. If the news came out, it would just wreck her. Guys, Karen Slaughter does a fantastic job of writing people with psychopathy. I swear she gets it. The story really had a few things that absolutely made me fall in love with it. One, the main antagonist is so believable and so horrible. I just love thrillers. If the bad guy is going to be a bad guy, make them horrible. I also loved the relationship between the 2 girls. I loved how smart and intelligent both of them are, and how powerful and strong both of them are. Karen Slaughter did make me cry again, but it wasn't much, and it was while I was driving, so I didn't get to show you all what happened, but it was basically like one tear going down my face. This book also had such amazing twists and turns. I was really invested in it. I was really, really enjoying it, and I feel like I was like, like every other chapter character. I also think that the ending of this book was really, really good and super satisfying, and I feel like it was the perfect ending to this type of a story. Overall, I really, really loved it, and I am so excited to be continuing on and trying more Karen Slaughter books in the future. Her books are not for the faint of heart. There are so many trigger warnings out there, guys. I can't even begin to tell you all of them, but I mentioned a lot in my reading vlog where I read this book, so if you want to know more specifics, go check that one out. But if you have any problem with gruesome or violent scenes, they're going to be directly on page and you're going to see them, then you should not read this book. But I did end up rating it a 4.9, which I rounded up to 5 stars on Goodreads. Up next, we have The Last Watch, which is an adult space opera sci-fi story about these two main characters who have been sent off to the edge of this planet to work there. One of which she has been there for a few years. She is the captain of this ship, and the other is being sent there at the beginning of the story. He is just arriving. He is basically royalty, and he's being sent away because he did something that his family was not a fan of, and so they're basically trying to forget about him and send him off to the edge of the universe. While they're there, they realize that the edge of the universe is closing and that is going to cause a lot of issues. So they are trying to rush back, beat the edge from destroying them, trying to stop these aliens from stopping them, and these aliens who are trying to hurt humankind, and they are trying to just get the news to Earth. I really enjoyed this book, guys. I absolutely thought it was phenomenal. The writing is really good. The characters are really good. I was hooked from page 1 and I felt like it was really fantastic. In fact, page 1 is really funny, and if you ever get a chance, I recommend going and reading page 1, but it's for adults only, so I'm not going to be reading it to you all just in case. I really, really liked our characters a lot, like a lot. The main man in this story reminds me so much of Flynn Rider from Tangled, like so much so, guys, that I was just like, he's hysterical. He's so intelligent and he's so smart, and yet he's so charming, and he has such charisma that it was really great reading about him, and yet he wasn't an ass and he wasn't arrogant, and I didn't ever once feel like I wanted to punch him in the face. I also really loved that the main romance was not between our two POVs. Our main female captain does have a romance, and it's not with the other man that we're reading about, and that is something that always just makes me happy because it doesn't have to be between our main two POVs. I will say though that I had 2 main issues with it, and those 2 issues are strong enough that I am not sure if I will actually go on to read the sequel. So my first issue was there was way too much science in this book. They would be talking for paragraphs at a time about sciencey things that were way over my head. And if you've been on my channel for any amount of time, you already know that I don't really care for like super in-depth science in my science fiction. So I found myself zoning out and skimming and not really caring about those parts. The other issue that I was having is the world building was not as straightforward as I would have liked. It took me a good 30 to 40% through this book, which is not super long, but that's enough to realize that there were aliens. So in case you're not familiar with how space operas work, there are kind of 2 types, right? So there's either humans are alone in the universe and we have spread out across the universe, or humans are not alone in the universe and there are aliens. And I started out this book thinking that it was humans are alone in the universe and we have just spread out across it, and then later realized, no, there are aliens who are not built like us, who are not looking like us, who don't act like us or think like us, who do not have bodies like us, who are being a problem. I would have just liked a little bit more understanding of how this world works, how we got here, where these aliens came from, what the differences are between us, instead of just being like pulled along and whisked off and then realizing in the middle of a battle scene that I'm fighting someone who has armor for skin. So I loved it, but I just feel like it could have been done a little bit differently to make me rate it a 5 star, but I did rate it a 4 out of 5 stars. I would reread it, and I think upon reread, I will make my decision as to whether or not I would pick up the sequel. One thing I should mention about this book though, it did something phenomenal with time travel. So there are these things called like echoes, I think is what they're called. You'll see an echo of what is about to happen. So it's like the decisions you're about to make actually happen, but it's not really you, and other characters can interact with that future you, and then it'll disappear, and then you'll come along and do the same exact things. And I really liked how that played into this book, and I thought it was a unique idea and really cool and really fun. Up next, I have the one graphic novel that I read this month, which is The Shadow of the Throne. I got the arc from the publisher, so I want to thank them for giving me this arc in exchange for an honest review. But overall, I have some thoughts. First up, we are following a boy named Jordan, which in the summary on Goodreads, his name is wrong at one point. Like, it says Jordan, and then in another point in the summary it says Jason, so I hope they figured that one out. He is on a trip to New York City with his family. It's his two parents, and then he has younger twin brothers, and he is basically a third parent and is feeling neglected, and like his family doesn't care for him, and like he has to raise his brothers, and he doesn't get to be a child himself. I think he's somewhere in his teen year. He wanders off in the museum by himself really quickly and stumbles across this portal to a fantasy realm, and it is very high fantasy, fae, elves, you name it. And so when he is there, he starts to realize that the world is not as perfect as he thought it was going to be, and that there is a monster coming to take over the land, and so he takes up the sword and helps protect the people there. First off, I want to say that the artwork was absolutely phenomenal in this book. 5 out of 5. The art was good. The colorist did such an amazing job. I feel like the story though was very mediocre. It has that kind of portal fantasy feel to it, but the story, the plot in the actual fantasy part of the world just kind of predictable, wasn't super great, really felt rushed even for a graphic novel. And then in the end, I was like, I didn't see any benefit to our main character making the choice that he did at the end. And I couldn't quite figure out what target demographic this book was written for. Maybe middle grade, but the main character was too old really for a middle grade story. But it felt very juvenile, and if it was trying to target middle grade, then I think the story did a fine enough job. But if it wasn't trying to target middle grade, if it was trying to hit like YA, then I don't think it hit right. And finally, yeah, it was gay, so that's great. That's always fantastic. Overall, I ended up rating it at 2.7. On Goodreads, I rounded down to a 2-star, I think. Next, I read Blood Like Magic, which I really enjoyed, guys. It was really good, and I was actually pleasantly surprised by it. This is a YA sci-fi, which has witches in it, and I wasn't ready for how much I was going to like that idea as a whole. I think what really drew me in first off was that it wasn't as predictable as a lot of YA stories that I read, and I was finding some twists that I wasn't expecting. There were some twists that I did expect, and I went in expecting to expect all of them, so I wasn't angry about the fact that I could see some of them happening. I was pleasantly surprised that I didn't see some of them happening. I also really liked how they played with the whole entire concept of love. Maybe I should back up and tell you what this story is about really quickly. So we are following our main girl, Voya, I think that's her name, and she is about to have her ascension, which means that all witches in this world, not everyone is a witch, not everyone knows about magic, but people who are witches, when they hit puberty, go through this ascension, and it allows them to use magic, and it allows them to get their witch gift. So each witch has a very specific gift to them. Like, one of the characters in the book can read minds, but no one else in the book can read minds. And so Voya is about to go through this, and she has to go through this trial, and when she gets her trial, it is much harder than she thought it was going to be, and she finds out that she has 30 days to kill her first love, or she won't be a witch, and that all magic will be taken from her family completely if she does not succeed. So this book really reminded me a lot of Encanto. Here we are following an African descendant family, and we are following a Black girl specifically who is dealing with not only being Black in a society, but also trying to figure out what she's gonna do to get her witch trial and who she can fall in love with and what's going on. Like I said, it reminded me a lot of Encanto, specifically because there is kind of this house magic system thing that is going on with them. There is a strong emphasis on family, and there is a grandmother matriarchal figure who is the lead owner of magic, who is like the top power person at play. I loved the commentary that this book had on being Black and being in a sci-fi setting. I also really loved the commentary that it had on gender and sexuality. There were a couple of different trans characters and there were a couple of different sexualities represented in the story. One of the sexualities that I was very pleased to see was demisexual. I feel like you do not see that often, and I'm really glad that it was talked about and discussed, and it was even talked about in a way where the character was like, I don't know if this title will fit me forever, but right now it's what works for me, and I think that that's such an important thing to say. I really, really loved the idea of like casual witches in a futuristic society. I thought that that was so great, and I will be looking for more books with that kind of an idea. I also just loved the family dynamic. They are all there for each other and they are all there to help out with each other, and even though family can be messy and problemsome and can get on your nerves at times, they all truly love each other, and it was just great to see them take care of each other. So I ended up rating this book a 4-star flat. I loved it. I'm glad I read it. I don't know if I'll continue on with the sequel or not. It's all going to depend on when the sequel comes out, how much I remember about book 1, what the ratings on book 2 are. I think that this book really could have been a fantastic standalone, and I think that if it had been just a little bit bigger view of the world and then had been a standalone, maybe with an extra like 200 pages exploring some of the concepts and themes and the world building, and then just wrapped up the story at the end of this one, I would have rated it a 5-star. But it is a duology, so only one more book. That's not too bad. Next up, I did read a book for a secret TBR, so I will not be telling you anything about it at this time, but I did rate it a 1-star. And then finally, we are coming up on The Great Hunt, which is the story of Rand, Perrin, and Matt continuing after the conclusion of book 1, where they are hunted and killed by these dark they're not killed. They are hunted by these dark creatures, and this magic woman takes them away from their hometown, thinking that if she gets them away from there, that the dark creatures won't kill everyone in the town, and they go on this journey to get to this magic city where they can be protected. Now, book 2 is mostly about the hunt for the Great Horn, and is this magical thing that got stolen from this keep and that they need in order to do a certain task. And when it got stolen, this dagger that is basically keeping Matt alive also got stolen. And so Matt, Perrin, and Rand continue on the journey with the people who are doing the Great Hunt to try and find the dagger in order to keep Matt alive. Now, the main thing that I really love about this series is the connection between all of our characters. It's funny, it's great, it's wholesome, it's fantasy at its like earliest stage. There are going to be some things that are kind of explained to the reader because fantasy, like, this is one of the first times it's been done like this. I'm not saying it is the first time, it's just one of the first times that fantasy has been addressed in this way. So I think things are kind of over-explained where they might not necessarily need to be done in a contemporary book. It's a fantastic read, and I really am enjoying reading this series. I really like Rand, and I like how dumb he is. I laugh at him so much and all of the dumb decisions that he makes, including just running away from his problems. I also absolutely love Perrin. He is my favorite, and I can't wait to see where he grows in the future books. And of course, Matt is such a great trickster and such a fun person to read about, and even he has his humorous moments. I also love all of the women in these books. They are so great and such great representation. They are evil, they are good, they are strong, they are weak, they are smart, they are dumb. They are everything. They are people first and foremost, which is so great to read in a fantasy world. I am predicting as of this point that I will rate this book a 4-star, the same as book 1. I think I will like book 1 slightly more than this one, but this one is opening up the world into a vast and magical place that I'm so excited to see how it continues on with, and it's really emphasizing this idea of a wheel of time and different worlds and going across these different places and decisions and how important they are. And then of course the dragon. The dragon is this magical person who is reborn every few generations, and they are thinking that one of our 3 boys might be the dragon. In this book we have a pretty good idea of who the dragon is, but I don't want to say in case you haven't picked this one up yet. Excited to finish it up and continue on with it and see where it continues to go. That's it. That's everything that I have to say this video, this wrap up. I hope that you all enjoyed it. I feel like even though I did have some fails, overall it was not a bad reading month, and I hope that I continue, and I hope that I can just start reading even better books in the future. Let me know down below if you've read any of these books, what you thought about them. If you have a wrap up, be sure to link it down below. I'd love to check it out. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I will talk to you in the comments. Bye.